I send greetings to all brothers and sisters through the Anglican Communion. My name is Godfrey Adera. I am a priest in the Anglican Church of Kenya and a student of theology at St. Paul's University, doing my PhD in theological studies. I want to offer a reflection on theological education in Kenya and especially in the context of the Anglican Church. Brothers and sisters, last year in November, theologians across Africa gathered in Nairobi to do a reflection on theological education in Africa. In the conference, they noted a number of things which were things to be really worried and concerned about. One of them was the disconnect of theological education with the lived realities, with contemporary issues in Africa, with contextual realities in Africa. And out of the conference, there was a suggestion that there is need to revamp and to look at the way theological education is delivered and packaged in Africa to prepare African theologians and ministers for Agenda 2063. And I want to respond to that paper from an Anglican perspective. In 2013, I joined theological education to train as an Anglican minister. And for my 4-year stay in theological college, I discovered a few things that resonate with what the conference in Nairobi noted. One of them is that yes, there was that disconnect of theological education in African context with local expressions of the Anglican faith at local levels, say in my village. There was that disconnect, which means that theological education focused so much on theories, on concepts that were borrowed from different contexts in the world, and largely from a Western context. Things that were not really in connection, or things that there was no deliberate move to connect them to lived realities and expressions of faith in the Anglican context of Kenya. And secondly, there was fragmentation of the curriculum where theology was steeped into classes. People talked about systematic theology and biblical theology and history of Christianity and pastoral theology, not as complementary but as competing. And apart from just competing, there was the struggle of which one is theological enough. But also there were other courses that responded very well to the realities that were lived and expressed in local context. An example is African Christian theologies and African women theologies that used bibliographies from that recognized African authorship, that recognized the authorship of women, and that recognized very simple methods like storytelling and sources of theology like lived expressions of faith in multiple of ways within the Anglican Church context. So there were these two extremes. A theology that was steeped or trapped in theories and methods that did not connect with the lived expressions of faith in the Anglican context, and a side that responded to those very needs. But then these two extremes were like pulling apart, and there was not a moment that they came together as a wholesome way of developing an Anglican theologian to respond to the issues in the world today. And having said that, I left the college and went out as a minister. And so it was upon me now to begin to make sense of what I learned. It means there was a struggle in the theological education to form me as a minister to go respond to the needs of the people of the world out here. And so my recommendation for the Anglican Commission on Theology, and especially in African context, is we need a theological education that prepares people who are aware, people who are available, and people who are able. And I will explain. People who are aware, they are aware of lived realities and how those lived realities influence expression of faith, how those lived realities influence how people interact at various levels. And to be aware of those realities, it means that theological curriculum should entail inclusion of African authorship, inclusion of young people. By the way, during that conference in Nairobi, conspicuously missing were the young people who would be present in 2063. And so there is need to include young people because of the demographic bulge currently that says there are many young people in Africa and in Kenya specifically. And so their lived realities, their concerns should really matter and become items of theological conversation at theological colleges. So that will make ministers or theologians who are aware of the realities that people live in, how those realities can connect with theological education. Number two, I talked about preparing theologians who are available to act, available to represent Christ in the community, available to bring life and life in abundance, which is the promise of Christ in the gospel. And being available is not just to come and stand, not just to come and be with people. Being available is to be active with them in their expressions of faith, in their expressions of frustrations, in their desires. Ministers who would be available with people at their levels, even people who would not be easily recognized as important in congregations, in church. Ministers who are available to them at their level, to women who have been excluded from theological education and leadership in church, to young people who are struggling even to identify as people of faith in the Anglican, to people who do not want to come to church. A minister who will be available to them. To make them available, theological education should now be intentional in forming people through what I would call through relevant pastoral care and constant methods for doing ministry at parish level. To be available requires intentional formation. Do we have a time in theological colleges where people are allowed to be out of class just to go out there and learn from the community, to know the wisdom of the community, to know how the community are producing knowledge on various things, allowing people at theological education to interact with the community at that level. And finally, people who are able to respond to emerging trends, to respond to contemporary issues. And currently, there are issues such as ecological concern, where I would say that unpredictable weather patterns that we see these days are posing a great threat to food security in Africa, in Kenya in particular. There are issues of gender and sexuality which are very emotive in our context today, and there are issues of public theology where people are longing for a prophetic voice of the church in the public sphere. Are we preparing ministers, theologians, people who are able to respond to those needs, and not just to respond to them through articulation, but to respond to them with relevant praxis to bring a change and a transformation to the communities? To do that, there is need, therefore, to train or to revise theological education, to begin to put emerging trends and emerging issues as items of conversation, items of theologizing within theological education. So I look forward to a time when our theological education will be revised to make theologians, make ministers, make people in church, make lay people aware, available, and able to practice out there and bring the good news of Christ, of life in abundance, in a context of many challenges. Thank you.